Increasingly, the face of the military is changing, and so is the ethnic and cultural makeup of the veteran population in California. This forum explores how race, culture, and ethnicity affect the veteran experience and challenge the stereotypes and images we hold about veterans.
I'm in the awkward position of having to correct my colleague, but you'll understand why it's so important that I do so. In the hierarchy of military branches, the Marine Corps considers itself, and maybe rightly so, you know, it depends on who you're talking to, the most elite military branch. And I was not a Marine. My father was a Marine in World War II, but I'm a little bit unique on this panel tonight because I was a draftee. Some of you will remember the draft. My students don't know what that was, but I have to educate them. But I was a draftee into the United States Army during the Vietnam period, so I was not a Marine. That's important. I could say more, but I won't. All right, so let's get started. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for inviting all of us here tonight. I want to start with a phrase that you've probably heard quite often in recent years, and that is, thank you for your service. When veterans hear that term, whether they're from previous wars or more recent wars, it's always very ambivalent for us because we don't know what you mean exactly. If you mean thank you for fighting for our freedom, some veterans will say, okay, yes, we did that. And others of us will say, well, what do you mean? It depends on what war we were in and who was really threatening your freedom, really. And so some veterans, when they hear that phrase, even young veterans from recent wars, will feel a little bit of anger, because one of the things we want to explore tonight is not only what it is to be in the military or what it is to be in a war, which, you know, leads to all kinds of voyeuristic structures that we don't want to reproduce tonight, but also what it means to be used in many ways. What it means to be cannon fodder in a war that by the time you finish your tour of duty, you may not even believe in that war anymore. So these are all things we want to explore tonight. The diversity of tonight's evening has more to do with the diversity of experiences, not just based on gender or ethnicity or sexuality or class, but the diversity of the various wars that we all represent up here, and those of us who perhaps didn't go to a combat zone and yet felt threatened even inside the U.S. military. I think we'll surely be talking tonight about what it's like for women in the U.S. military. Not always a safe place. And so the diversity is really about the complex experiences that different communities bring with them after military service. So the structure tonight is very simple. I'm going to ask each, in a minute I'll sit down with them, and I'll ask each of our panelists to talk about themselves before they were in the military. In other words, what not drove them, but what led them to enlist, or perhaps enlist in the reserves? What was their family's experience of that decision that they made? Because in many cases, it's a family experience, family decision. And then the second part will be, what was your life like after your time in the military? And then the third part is really the most interesting to me, and that is, what is your understanding of the way in which veterans are used by the culture, are branded by the culture? And as I said earlier, we're living in a time now where, unlike the immediate post-American War and Vietnam period, when veterans were portrayed in the media as drug addicts and criminals, today, we have a president and a first lady who made the point of building on this brand of thank you for your, service and the veteran as a cultural hero. It hasn't always been that way. And so one thing I would like to talk about with all of you and the panelists is how does the culture use veterans? And if people in the military are sometimes used, why is it that they continue to be used by the culture even after the war is over? And it's very ironic, I think. Maybe I'm injecting too much politics into this, but I don't think we can talk about these subjects without it. It's horribly ironic to me that the headlines yesterday and today is that the city of Mosul has fallen to Sunni insurgents. Now, a lot of Marines died taking that city. And here we are just a few years later, and that city is back in the hands of an insurgency. So, again, there's a lot of ambivalence here, celebration, if you will, but for me, there are too many complex ironies whenever we talk about military service and veterans. So I'm going to stop there. Before I sit with the panel, I do want to read a short poem by a local veteran, Chicano veteran, named Leroy Quintana. He taught for many years at Mesa College. Some of you know where that college is, just up the road. And as I said, the veteran experience is very diverse. We've all had different takeaways from our military service. But one thing almost every military vet agrees with is what his or her relationship with the military recruiter was, right? That first contact you probably made with the military was through a recruiter. So Leroy's poem is very short. It's called Armed Forces Recruitment Day, Albuquerque High School, 1962. After the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army, Sergeant Castillo, the Marine Corps recruiter, got a standing ovation when he walked up to the microphone and said proudly that unlike the others, all he could promise was a pack, a rifle, and a damned hard time. Except for that, which was true, he was the biggest of liars. So I don't want to besmirch all recruiters, but one of the common experiences shared by most veterans is your recruiter told you half the truth, right? So let me introduce our panelists. On the far end, Justice Castañeda holds a bachelor's degree from UC San Diego in Urban Studies and Planning, a master's degree from the Graduate School of Education at Stanford, and a master's of city planning from MIT. At MIT, he focused on housing policy and community and economic development. He served in the Marine Corps for 8 years, rising to the rank of Staff Sergeant. He is currently a PhD student in medical sociology at UC San Francisco, where he is conducting research on violence, trauma, and economic development. In the middle, we have Monica Lee, who was born and raised in Paramount, California, to Cambodian refugee parents. After graduating from high school in 1999, she enlisted in the Marine Corps Reserve, where she served as a supply administration technician for Marine Wing Support Squadron 473, while she was also working on a bachelor's degree in sociology at Cal State Fullerton. In 2003, her reserve unit was mobilized for Operations Noble Eagle and Enduring Freedom, and she was called to provide rear support at Marine Corps air stations in Miramar and Yuma. Currently, Monica is pursuing a master's degree in urban planning and public administration at USC, where she is a Sea Grant Fellow. Robert Lewis, on the end here, entered the Marine Corps in 1965. During his service in Vietnam during 1968, he was a member of the 1st and 2nd Battalion, 13th Marine Regiment, with the 3rd and 1st Marine Divisions. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry from Norfolk State University and also a degree in nursing. In 2012, he retired from the VA San Diego healthcare system, where he had served as a registered nurse in patient education, the patient education department. Robert is currently working on a PhD in music and serves as the president of the National Montford Point Marine Association here in San Diego, Chapter 12. So if you could give a round of applause for our 3 veterans here. So I'm going to just go across the panel here and ask Justice to start out, telling us a little bit about his life before military service, what led him to the Marine Corps, and what the reaction was from his community and his family. So, Justice?
Good afternoon or good evening. You guys are a good-looking group of folks. I have to say that. And I appreciate you guys all being here. And before we even get, it's very difficult for me. I mean, something I'm going to get into later, and I'm going to answer Jorge's question, and I'll shut up in a second. But when we think about war and narratives of war and violence, it's very difficult for me. I mean, the work I do, and we'll get into that too, with youth around the country and our communities here, is how we compartmentalize certain types of violence and trauma and war as being legitimate and others is not so much. And so thinking right now in the communities here in San Diego and the youth, the groups and the people who I've met, I was an educator here for a long time. I'm lucky enough to have a colleague of mine who was an educator who basically taught me how to teach, and a Marine veteran, well, actually a Marine officer here who's a good friend of mine, and they saw me go through all this. So I have to acknowledge them and the fact that we're here in this city and the things that are going on geopolitically, and I don't have to get into it to politicize this too much, but everything else is going on with our youth and with the land here in San Diego and who it belongs to. So I think it's important to recognize that here. In terms of how I ended up in the military, I'll just say I come from a pit of spit, proverbial pit of spit. My mother was a homeless type, and spent a lot of my childhood, in shelters and such, and then was with my father for a few years before I was back out on the streets. And I don't have a story, where the recruiter was dishonest, because he didn't come to me, I came to him, begging to get out of a situation. I had just beaten a felony charge by the skin of my teeth, and a few of my friends were dead, and a couple were on their way out. And I know in my heart of hearts that I was as close to being the cause to death of people who I probably grew up with a mile away. And so I went to them and said, "Can you get me out of here?" And I'll never forget the Marine recruiter saying, "Son, you have no idea where you came. You have no idea who we are." And 3 weeks later, I was on a plane, and it saved my life. My father we would consider him something. I got my name from my father, who considered himself somewhat of a Chicano revolutionary. Now he plays fantasy football and golfs, so figure that out. But a lot of I saw a lot of hypocrisy in a lot of these movements. And I grew up around kind of on the edges of all this deviance and stuff that I was involved in. I saw these Chicanos and these Mecha and the Black Student Union at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I saw a bunch of hypocrites and hypocrisy. And I saw a lot of condescension in the way that they looked at us when they came into our schools, the way they talked to us. And so I really, I didn't have any affinity with that in them at all. And when it came down to it, when they were watching us die and a lot of their own kids dying in these streets, they had nothing to say. But we ended up in the military, and all of a sudden they got an opinion. And in no uncertain terms, the military, when I left, I got very influenced by Stokely Carmichael and Malcolm X and Huey Newton. And the Marine Corps is a really interesting place to be getting into that. But Huey Newton has a line, most people don't think about prison as a place to find freedom, and it was the first place that I ever found mine. And I thought a lot about that in my first enlistment when I was in the military, and I went through a period of sobriety for about 3.5 years and voluntary celibacy, just thinking about basically the monster I thought I was. So that's how I ended up in the military, in a nutshell.
Thank you. Monica?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. So I'm from Paramount, California, and my parents came in 1980 because they're refugees. There was a lot of genocide going on, conducted by the Khmer Rouge. So who I was before I was in the military, I was just coming out of high school, and there was a lot of gang violence during that time, and a lot of my family members were in gangs, and I thought about joining a gang, and I just sort of wanted to escape that. But I also grew up like sort of feeling like being in the military would be one of the most honorablest thing to do, to serve your country and to protect it. And then also my brother had just joined the Marine Corps, and I look up to my brother very much, and so I just thought it would be a good idea, to join. So that's why that's who I was before I was in the military.
Hello. Growing up, we basically lived in a neighborhood. As years progressed, they said it was the hood. But I had a good, strong, loving family. We were poor, but yet we were rich in love. Whole family was churchgoers. I actually wanted to become a minister. I really did. And even today, I think that I can pick up a Bible and pray someone's soul to heaven. But I was in the Boy Scouts, the Eagle Scouts, all of that stuff. Made Eagle Scout, Junior Assistant Scout Master, Lifeguard. And I was the baby of the family. That was the problem. I could get anything that I wanted, and I needed a change. So what prompted more than a change was the year that I left, my last year in high school, rather. I was in the band, and we played. We had the opportunity. We had a famous band. We had the opportunity to play halftime for the Baltimore Colts. And I looked at that, and one day when we was back at high school, I was at the band room. I saw this ugly guy come around the school in his Marine uniform. And I said, damn, if he can look that good, I can look better. So I went down and saw the recruiter. He promised me that rose garden. He said, you'll see the world. Boy, did I see the world. Got down to boot camp. I cursed him out. But if I had to do it all over again, I would, because I needed that change. I had, once again, very strong family structure, but I wanted something else. And I actually found it in the Marine Corps. Now, I was in the gang too. My grandfather was a gangster. I didn't find that out till later. That's why nobody bothered me when I said something to him. They knew who my grandfather was. But Marine Corps put me on a path. And like it says, when all else fails, follow the instructions. So that's what I did when things began to fail. And I followed what I was taught. That's how I got in the Marine Corps.
All right, so let me ask for follow-ups now with Justice. So you mentioned I know a little bit about Justice because I had the pleasure of knowing him when he was an undergraduate at UCSD. And I have to say, at the risk of embarrassing him, he's one of the more brilliant students I've ever known, and I've been teaching for 30 years. He's not going to like me saying that, but and by the way, he's not going to like this either, but I think he's good looking, so. He doesn't think that. All right. So, Justice, so your parents were organizers, were activists in Madison, Wisconsin. And the Chicano movement, of which they were part, obviously comes out of a very strong anti-war ideology, which, was peaking during the war in Vietnam. And so when you actually went and enlisted, could you talk a little bit about what your parents and your family's reaction was?
Yeah, so at the time, appreciate it. But at the time, I hadn't seen my mother in years. Over about a decade, I really had no relationship with her. My father, I learned a lot about this, and it was a source of frustration in my life in terms of the own contradictions. And I got this phone out here just so I'm conscious of running my mouth. In any case, about this movement because I became very politicized in the Marine Corps, and I got heavy into a lot of sociological theory, which is a really interesting place to get into things like Weberian thinking, W.B. Du Bois. I mean, this is really interesting, and Foucault and all this other stuff. But I really was thinking about these contradictions because it didn't make sense as I was politicized in the military about how my father and like the relationship I had. And Natalia Molina was one of my professors, and I think a lot of the scholarship that I would say that runs in the veins of a lot of the curriculum and things is they taught me a lot about what was actually happening in the nature of masculinities inside of these power movements. And so I began to understand my father a little bit better. And my dad I didn't even know. He didn't even know I was going. I tried to keep it from him until pretty much about a week before I left, and he probably wouldn't have known. I probably could have went to boot camp and came back, and he probably wouldn't even known I was gone. I mean, this is kind of where our relationship was at the time. He actually was locked up for a year right at the end of this stuff. So, it wasn't so much him, but all these other old machista and a lot of other people that all of a sudden had an opinion. And even, my family and at the time, I have a lot of choice words I'm not going to use here because I know we're being taped. But in terms of, some of these people's children were dead, and some of their children were going to prison. And they were so disengaged, they were writing a paper. And I always think about this. It's like the work isn't in wherever you're writing this paper. It's right here on these streets. And where are you when all this stuff is happening? And how can you be so disengaged from your own theory and your own politics that you don't see that? People compartmentalize war like it's happening somewhere else. War, to me, is a construct of consumption. It's us. It's what we do. I was talking to the captain earlier, and there's not a technology you can name that was developed for any other reason. And I don't say that with spit or chagrin. I'm saying that that's a matter of fact. This is what we do as a society. And we make war. And to think that somehow, because you're not the one fighting it, when I got out of the military, I had an officer who was like, you're never going to be able to address war and the politics of war in the military. You got to get out and go fight it where it's made, which is in academia. So that's the answer to that.
So, I think that's a really interesting point, several points that he makes, but, I was once at a meeting at UC Irvine in a room with a lot of very high-profile professors, and one of them said, well, nobody reads Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn, in academia. Who pays attention to them? And this was a very famous theorist, cultural theorist, who, if I mention her name, some of you will know, Gayatri Spivak. And some of us who were veterans pointed out to her that people in the military read Chomsky and Howard Zinn and Foucault and these other passé, out-of-fashion figures, right? So I think justice reminds us of that. A lot of people who don't have any family members or friends in the military think, well, they're all right-wing, reactionary. No, they're not. They're not like really smart people reading a lot of different things and getting educated within this structure that we call the military. So I just think that's important to remember. Now, Monica, I want you to talk a little bit, if you will, about your family's reaction when you got in the reserves, because you said your brother was in the Marine Corps. And then, so what was your mom's reaction when you wanted to go in?
Yes, so my brother joined and everyone was supportive. And then a year later, when I wanted to join, nobody wanted me to join. Yes, like a lot of the elders just felt like, women didn't belong in the military. And then like they told me that I wouldn't be able to make it, which made me want to join even more, So yes, they spent a lot of time trying to convince me not to join, but I was very determined to join.
And is that because you're a woman mainly, or?
Yes, because I'm a woman and because he's a guy. So I guess my parents are just we're very traditional. Like their roles were really set in the house. Like women were supposed to wash dishes and cook and clean and stuff. So they didn't want me to go against those rigid roles.
So can you talk a little bit about your time in the reserves as a woman?
Okay.
What was that experience like? Did you see differences between how you were treated and your male counterparts?
So I'll just say this: a lot of, women in the military, or I can just speak for myself. I guess the worst thing I could say that happened to me was just like sort of sexual harassment. I feel like it happens all the time, and I think that the way that I dealt with it was just to ignore it, you know. So I feel like I'm lucky because when I talk to other women, or when I read or look at or watch videos on other women's experience, they go through a lot worse. But yeah, so, and then I also feel like during my service, it just seems like women have to try just a little bit harder to prove themselves, you know. So if you're on a board and you're going up for promotion, and it just seems like you have to speak louder and just work harder to be recognized, or to stand out, you know. So yes.
Okay, thank you. So, Robert, I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit more on where you came from, where in the United States you were, because you told us a little bit about your family, but tell us about what the conditions were. Were you in California at the time? No. Yeah, so tell us about, the region you were in, and especially what it was like for African Americans.
Well, originally I'm from Norfolk, Virginia. A lot of people don't know that that's the South, unfortunately. The way we were raised, I was raised in a neighborhood uh, that were full of Jewish people and blacks. We were taught not to dislike a person or a whole, let's say we were taught not to dislike a whole race because of the color of their skin. If you're going to dislike that person, you hate that person, that one individual. Everything was pretty cool. That was during the 60s, and we had really no problems with race, my family. My father worked at the Naval Shipyard in Portsmouth. My mother was a nurse at a predominantly white hospital. So as time progressed, out of 5 kids, I was the youngest. I always got what I wanted. I needed, like I said, I needed a change. So at 17, I like to joke that my parents had to sign for me to go in the military. They actually signed the papers and took me down to the recruiter. Not in a bad way, it was a good way. They were happy for me. They were a little bit concerned too. My older brother, he was very irritated that I did that because I had 2 scholarships waiting on me, but I opted to go in the military. And going from point A to point B, I had some very, very serious rude awakenings when it came down to race. Because I was from going down here to Beaufort, South Carolina. I got into boot camp. I was called everything except for my God-given name. I was hit in the head with a coffee cup. I was slapped. Anybody that been in the Marine Corps know that sand flea routine. I was humiliated. I was angry. I was mad. And I said that once I get out of boot camp, I'm going to kill all of my drill instructors. Unfortunately, Vietnam did that for me. But a cleansing, being around different races, actually talking to these guys, has shed a light on my life in more ways than one. That light really came out on graduation day when they finally called me a United States Marine. I couldn't walk straight. I was so proud. I was so happy. Plus, I was getting the hell out of Paris Island. And to this date, my first day on Paris Island, in the wee hours in the morning, and my last breakfast at Paris Island was the same thing, some burnt toast with chipped beef on it. And to this day, I love what we call SOS. But with everything, if you ever seen the movie Full Metal Jacket, and Arlie Ermy is talking all of that stuff, my tour was worse than that. But you had to stand up straight, you had to stand tall, you had to face the consequences, your own actions, everything. And you had to work as a team to get through. And I've always, at that point, I've worked with teams, but this was the first time I worked with a multicultural team. And at 17 years old, graduating from boot camp, to me, I was a man. Well, back then, 17, you go into any bar with a uniform on to drink, so you were a man. But that day, really, the ending of that 8 weeks, 12 weeks, crammed into 8 weeks, really changed my life. And the next question I had for myself is, where do I go from here? And that was a long road, believe me.
All right, thank you. So a couple things have surfaced here. One is the way in which the military serves as a kind of bracketing or deferral of animosities that might exist in the greater society. So you hear this a lot in veterans' narratives, right? About, you'll hear a Caucasian veteran say, I'd never lived with black people until I was in the Marine Corps or in the Army or in the Navy. And so there's a certain kind of, as Robert just eloquently described, there's a solidarity that is created across those divisions. And then, as both Justice and Robert said, there's the construction of a certain kind of masculinity that the culture needs for whatever reason. And I know Justice has thought about this a lot, because both the bracketing of racial division and the construction of masculinity is premised on the exclusion and actually the oppression of other groups. And so that comes into the, the marching songs we all sang when we were in boot camp, right? How are women portrayed? How are queer people portrayed in those marching songs, right? Because a certain kind of very traditional hyper-masculinity is being constructed in those situations, right? And so then when we get to 2014, when there are a lot more women in the military than there were back in our day, in the Vietnam period, how do they fit in? And we find this with young people in local high schools when we go out and talk to them about whether they should enlist or not. And that's their decision. We don't tell them what to do. But when we listen to them, it's interesting to hear the young women say things like Justice said earlier, which is, I need to get out of my house. There's abuse going on in my home, and that's why I want to join the military. And we're thinking, we don't really tell them this at that point, but we're thinking, but wait until you get into the military as a woman. What's that going to be like, right? So all of these tensions are in the air for people, young people considering enlistment, right? And it's something I think veterans have a lot to teach about. So let's move now to the post-military period. Justice, you want to talk about a little bit about what it was like for you? I mean, I knew you at UCSD, and UCSD, those of you who are from San Diego may recall that in 2010 there were a series of racist incidents at UC San Diego, something called the Compton Cookout, where a fraternity had done some blackface parties, and then there was a lynching noose found in our library. And Justice was a student there, and he and I talked a lot about, well, what does this mean? What do these groups want exactly? And aren't these groups really, in many ways, pampered? Because they don't know the reality of working class folks who are never going to make it to a UC campus, right? So now we're on the back end of that, and when you come out of the Marine Corps, Justice, what was it like to go to a place like UCSD, which is a very elite institution, as you all know? It's not really in San Diego, it's in La Jolla, and that tells you about all you need to know. about the culture of that place, right? So Justice, what was that like?
So I'm gonna, as I often do, I'm going to digress a little bit, and I'm gonna introduce a construct in about 3 minutes. Some I've been working on theoretically. One thing I love about theory is it allows me a lot of space to really think about things in maybe a way that we don't conventionally do it. So I've been doing a lot of work around veterans transition and transition, or the idea of transition for youth, and I've been really thinking a lot about the idea of the superhero and the anti-hero and the hero. And I don't believe in heroes. I don't think there's such a thing. I think it's something we like there to be. I think it's something that's convenient, the pristine individual who does all, and I think it doesn't exist. I think the other two do in an iterative levels. And I think they both are a reminder of a pain that's an extant pain that exists in our society. And that we all approach this concept and these concepts very much with a degree of hesitation, and but it's never to be celebrated. It's to understand that we're still, in light of all the things that we've done, this is still the way that we handle our problems. And we deal with our own hypocrisy when we talk to youth, when we talk to people in our streets, when we tell them on one hand to do one thing and another, and then we do this other thing politically. And I say all that because one thing in the transformation that Robert described in boot camp, I think all of us who have went through boot camp, and Marine boot camp especially, have a story about that. And it's the first time I've ever been healthy, and I think about this for a lot of youth. Where is the places that we can go? Before that, the only place I had ever been where I was going to eat 3 times a day at the same time, and I was going to go to sleep every night in the same place and get 8 hours of sleep guaranteed, and I was going to have inoculations, access to basic health care where it was safe in a relative sense. And again, and this is a caveat, an asterisk I have to point out, is that as a woman, it's a whole different story, and I don't claim to know everything about every veteran experience or even other men, but I just have to say that. But it was jail. It was the only other place that I'd been. So the first time I'd ever been in a space that was like that was in jail. And so for a lot of youth, this is the case. And so what happened in boot camp? You all of a sudden, you realize, the idea of a superhero to me is someone who can operate and negotiate life outside of institutions. And that's a heck of a power. And the idea that you have everything you need on your person to do anything you need to do at any given moment. You know how to access, in essence, basic needs. You know how to go, and I problematized this in a thesis I wrote about this concept. But so I say that because a lot of people, when you talk, as I grew older, I became more patient with a lot of these same groups that I had a lot of problems with as a kid, the Metro and a lot of these other students. And a lot of people feel very threatened about these spaces, academic spaces. I have a great mentor named at MIT, a guy named Phil Thompson, who sat me down once, and I was expressing a lot of the things that I had saw. And he said, man, for you to be in this space and not understand it as a contested space is to be completely ignorant of the history and formation of this space. And I say all that because a lot of the things that I think a lot of students have, students of color, a lot of people when they go into these universities, I didn't have, because I wasn't trying to fit in. And I say this to this day, when I go and, the groups of folks that I tend to gravitate toward, they still are veterans. And when I was doing some work at the high school and I needed people to come out and actually get on the streets and do work with me in San Diego, even though a lot of these guys were, if you talk to them, absent of the context, politically, they couldn't be further from me. But when you said, hey, this is me, and you know me, and we went to war together, and I'm working on this thing with you, they showed up. All these other groups, they will write you a paper. It's like, hey, we're trying to do this. They'll write you a paper. But when you need people to show up, who's going to show up? So I say all that because in terms of the way I was thinking about school and education. Now, the flip side in the last minute of this, I'll just say, I come from a long line of badass brown people who will stop at nothing to bring music and art to children. And I say that because the lineage, aside from my father, is so strong that I think like a lot of people, I went to war and I wanted to die. But it was just too strong for that. I didn't deserve that, right? I had to live. And that's much more painful sometimes. But when I got out, and a lot of the things that people met, I met Jorge, Natalia, the people who I met, and the people who, this teacher here, Dan Pena's right there, a teacher at Garfield. Him and this guy, Dave White, who happened to be a Vietnam veteran at the high school that I was at. These people saved my life. And I always say that with the kids, like people are like, it's great that you're working with these youth. And I'm like, no, those youth saved my life. They gave me a reason, and they gave me a perspective that I don't know if I would have been all right going through it. And I had a lot of friends and people here. I have a colleague here from Stanford as well. And it's really interesting because I've met these people and they just show up. They kind of show up into my life, and they always save me and they always hold me. And I don't know what I would have been able to do without them. And so I guess in terms of individual volition and capacity for change. I don't know that I really did anything, but was vulnerable and was tried to be as honest as I could be. In terms of the Compton Cookout and all these other things, I mean, this is my attitude about it then, and it was my attitude now. There isn't racism at UCSD. There is racism in general that we're still trying to deal with. We have residual issues that we're trying to negotiate from post-colonial and post-slavery stress disorder across this country. And it bubbles up all over the place all the time. So it doesn't surprise me when these things happen. I think even in that case, I think in terms of response to it, I think my only frustration at the time was that it wasn't very strategic. And this is more Malcolm X, but a tactical approach is designed to get certain results. It's designed to get things done. And I don't know that the way we go about negotiating these things is always as tactical. I think it's very emotional, which is also very important. So I won't dismiss that.
Thank you. When I first met Justice, I'll tell a story on Justice again. We were talking about, well, how do you feel about being here, and what do you think of this institution? He said to me, I'm here doing an intelligence run, basically. I'm here to study the ruling class to see how they do things, and then I'm going to use their tools against them, essentially. So the whole thing was a military campaign for him, right? And I think he's been doing that at each of these institutions that he goes to, Stanford, MIT, and he's probably doing that on us right now. So thank you. So Monica, can you talk a little bit about what it was like when you got out? Are you still in the reserves?
Oh, no.
No.
Oh, no, I'm out now.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Let's see. So my experience is different from everyone because I was in the reserves. And I forgot to mention that I joined the reserves because I actually wanted to be active duty, but my brother negotiated with my mom and said, well, if she joins the reserve, then she'll be close to home. So that was the only way that my parents let me join the military, if I joined the reserves. But anyways, so yes, it's different from everyone. I think I feel lucky. So I never deployed. When the war started, my unit was activated, and then I was stationed, in Miramar, San Diego, and then also in Yuma. So I wasn't too far from home. When I was activated, I just had to drop my classes, not that big of a deal. And then coming back home, I just had to get a job and go back to school. I went to Cal State Fullerton at the time. And but the only thing that didn't go smoothly was trying to get my GI Bill. They said that I was supposed to ask for it while I was still in the reserves. So I was denied my GI Bill. So that's the only thing that didn't go that smoothly. Okay,
thank you. So Robert, you worked in the VA for a long time, so I'm wondering if you could talk about your post-military experience, but also talk a little bit about what's been in the news a lot lately, the problems with the VA. I mean, I'm not asking you to talk about the problems with the VA, but your experience with the healthcare part of it. And obviously you worked with a lot of veterans over the years.
When I got out, came back home, I had one hell of a rough time. I knew something was wrong. I didn't want to be labeled. Nobody talked to me. I self-medicated. Like I said, since I was a baby of the family, they let me do what I wanted to do. And so, believe it or not, I'm 6'5". In the spring, in the fall and winter months, I worked for DOD in DC. Then I quit. I come down to Virginia Beach and Norfolk area. In the spring, I used to drive this ice cream truck called Mr. Softy. And then I go to the beach, May 30th as a lifeguard. I was happy, but I was unhappy. I needed to do something. And that's when I remembered a friend of mine who was in Vietnam and lost his eye. I went over to Portsmouth Naval Hospital, and they had an adjacent building, which was the hospital, but was also the VA. That place was filthy. Anybody seen the 4th of July, that movie? That's the way veterans were treated. And actually, I said to myself one day, I'm going to work at the VA. And I wound up working there. I found out a lot more about veterans, how they think, how they manipulate the system, everything. And to this date, I am very, very proud to say that this negative thing about the VA didn't happen here in San Diego. I stand by this hospital 100%. I've had surgeries there. I've had appointments there. I was just over there the other day. I'll be back over there in the morning to see some friends. I'm still on their mailing list. Everything is good. One thing you have to, it would take longer, but one thing you have to understand about this situation with the VA, number one, if the Secretary of the VA had more power, probably a lot of this would not have happened. A lot of this, in my honest opinion, is propaganda. I'll give you a prime example where one guy said he waited for 3 months for an appointment. Then the next thing you know was 6 more months, three or 4 more months, and he died from liver cancer. You don't get liver cancer in January and die in June. Propaganda, the newspapers, reporters, they do not give out pertinent information. One thing that I did learn about veterans is that once they got the military, they may have the life insurance policy still going. They get a job, or the wife have a job, and they're using their health care insurance. Once that run out, or they realize what they can get from the VA, they want to rush to the VA. Is there a wait? Yes, there is. But they will always tell you that if you have a medical problem, go to the emergency room. That's the fastest way to get in there. Another thing that they try to incorporate is your doctor, yourself, your family members, and a social worker, to incorporate everything there so they don't miss anything. You cannot go to the doctor because you got a knot upside your head and then expect for him to guess that you have hemorrhoids if you don't tell him. You have to be very thorough. I always told my patients, write it down. Make a little list. Go for it. Another little added story. In March, they love me at this VA anyway. In March, my knee was hurting. And the ortho doctor that I want is booked up for over a year. They told me I could go to Balboa. First thing out of my mouth. I don't know no effing body at Balboa. I go in July next month. I have that date set plus another date. You have access, if you know anything about computers, where you can email your doctor and say, this is what's going on with me. I got blood coming out of my ear, my tooth hurt, whatever the case may be. And the first thing he's going to do is set up a quick appointment for you to come see him first. And they do have a lot of laws in the government healthcare system that a lot of people don't follow. That's why you hear a lot of negative comments about the VA. Now, if this thing passes, about Congress saying that veterans can go to a civilian hospital or a military hospital to get care, it's going to be a lot of crap. Because you will not be able to go to Scripps and ride around in your wheelchair, sticking your nose in other people's business, want to chit-chat because you're lonely like you can do at the VA. That's going to cause a problem. And a lot of these guys, they start this process now to whereas if I go to Kaiser, I tell my doctor I need something for pain. He's going to log it on the computer, look at my VA records, and find out that I already have stuff for pain. So you can't double dose yourself. That's going to make a lot of people mad. But the bottom line, I'll put two things together. Anger at coming back from Vietnam, deciding on what I want to do in my life. It hit me one day. I said, I want to go to nursing school. I wasn't even finished with nursing school and I got a job at the VA. Now I'm retired. And what am I doing now? Starting another career, just for the hell of it. So maybe if everything goes out real good, it'll be Dr. Robert Lewis, RN. And I tell people the RN stands for real nasty, because I can get nasty, you see. And one last thing I would like to tell you, personally, and we talked about this on the phone when we had a little conference call. After coming back from Vietnam, like I told you, I didn't want to be labeled as in World War II. They called it battle fatigue. In Korea, they called it shell shock. Vietnam, they finally came up with post-traumatic stress disorder. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I do things. I'm not violent. I'm an avid gun collector. Every time I go to the doctor, some say, you feel like hurting yourself? Hell no. You feel like hurting somebody else? Not yet. You know, but I'm saying it's control with me. I am happy. I'm glad to be here. And at my age, I think I still look good.
We agree with that. Yeah, go ahead.
Something about this VA thing. Something I love about the DMV is that when you think about the number, the total number, the multipliers of all the things that someone could come in there to do, and the multiple, in a city, an urban center where there's so many people coming from so many different places, and what they're asked to do on a daily basis in terms of all the possible combinations of things, it's pretty phenomenal. People like to use the DMV as like the thing to not have. I think it's pretty phenomenal for what it's being asked to do, right? I think when we think about the VA, what are we asking it to do exactly? What are we thinking is supposed to happen? That we want this normal war thing. We want to be able to do this to other people. And this isn't political. It's inherently political. But I'll say, the idea that we're going to send folks to other people's countries, to interfere or to negotiate their political and economic systems is what we call foreign policy. And we're going to kill them. And we're going to have our sons and daughters, this is what we're still doing, we have our sons and daughters go and kill these other people. So that we can have what exactly? This is the question, it's rhetorical. For what? There's been 84 or 70 shootings in the last 18 months here in this country, and however many kids. And when we think about what's happening right now, so we're going to go to war to do this, and we want this thing, this system, in terms of, and my research on veterans and veterans transition kind of yielded some of this, is that the narratives, as you see just with four little stories, none of us represent even the tiniest part of all the veteran experience. So you think about all the people that go in and everything else we bring into that space, and you want this one system to somehow mitigate that. And it's supposed to happen in a way that is like, it's seamless. And why do we think that can happen? And why do we expect it to? And I think that we get caught up and there's an internal conflict that we all kind of have, because this is that idea of that superhero or that anti-hero, that we like to thank it because it's something about us that hurts us, that we feel that conflict. And so when it doesn't work the way we want, we get very frustrated. But I think just taking on, the VA, I always think about the GI Bill as hypothetical, theoretical money. It's like in theory you get this money. So the trick is my economist inside of me will say, you need to find a theoretical economy to use that, because people usually don't take theoretical rent. But it'll come, it just takes a while. So like I have never, in any of the colleagues that I have here from graduate school know, I've never been in a school, UCSD also, I've never been in an educational institution where that worked. And it usually wasn't the VA, actually, it was the institution. And these universities not really, I was the only, think at MIT I was the only enlisted Marine, I was the only enlisted veteran in the whole institute and the only Marine there. And so, anyway, I just say that if we think about it in terms of what Robert's saying, about what we're really asking this institution to do. I think a big question that we have to ask ourselves is, why do we think that there is a way to do that? And why do we think that there is a way to create some institution that's going to mitigate all the chaos and all the complexity of what is, I would say, the bane of humanity? And I say that proud of my service and whatever that means, but I'll say that war is still the bane of humanity. It's what we do to each other.
Back to the VA. A little history. On the plaque at the VA, in the VA's books and everything, it clearly states, we will take care of those who have borne the battle. They are orphans and their widows. To date, the VA, when you look at this, let me put it to you this way. If you are a veteran, you were in the war, you are 100% service connected. 99 out of 100, you're going to die from your service connection. If you're married, your wife filed the paperwork, she'll get free health care for the rest of her life, plus a little nice fat check unless she gets married again. For a lot of the Vietnam veterans who had borne the battle, residual problems from Agent Orange like spina bifida, they will take care of your kid. But nothing in the VA says that because you're lazy, you're overweight, and you don't want to walk, we're going to give you a wheelchair. The first thing that they will do is try to set you up with a dietitian and pave the way. They try to do things prophylactically. It will set you up, send you to find out if your thyroid is working, everything. And if you don't do all your lab works and stuff saying that you can do, you don't do, and you still going to holler and scream that I need a wheelchair, your only best bet is to go to CVS Pharmacy and get one. Because I give you a written guarantee, there's another veteran there that really, really needs a wheelchair that's probably earned that wheelchair. That's where some of the conflict comes in at with the VA. If you ever take the time, go to the VA, go sit in area 1. You're going to see a guy here talking to another guy. Yeah, I got the same problem, and the doctor gave me this. And it's like a trickling down effect. He's going to go to his doctor and ask his doctor, can I have this? Because I got the same problem as Bob. Yeah, but Bob is loony. Bob on more medication, so you can't take what he's taking. It's kind of sad. But they sit and talk. They tell people how to get rated for post-traumatic stress. And then they get upset. They go to the media because they didn't get their money for post-traumatic stress. And because they were never in a combat situation, that's a total different picture. But I found out that if you were molested, God forbid, before you went in the military and it still bothered you, you have post-traumatic stress. It doesn't have to come from war. But the VA is complex. They're straightforward. Used to find someone like me that'll tell you straight where you can go with the bull. And then you have people that will pamper you just to make you happy. It's a conflict of interest. But once again, my VA here, I call it my VA, they get the job done. I think they do it very well. Thanks.
All right, so we have about 20 minutes left. I'd like to open it up to questions or comments from the audience for any of us up here. Don't be shy. Don't be like our undergraduates at UCSD. Yeah, right there. If you could shout it out, I guess.
Within society itself, but within man's own culture, within his own being, is that a possibility? Why life is so difficult and why there's so many circumstances and situations as far as trying to achieve and accomplish different goals, and for instance, like the VA, like this gentleman just said, you have this individual that's extremely overweight. He really doesn't want an answer to that question. He just wants a hand up, maybe a free check, maybe a free lunch. Is that because society in whole is in a sense fallen? How can I say it? We're just not the people that we should be or meant to be at one time. What I'm saying is, overall, is it because man himself isn't what he might have been in the past compared to what he is today? What is the reason for all this situation? Is it inhumanity? Is it something that's fall apart of a humanistic being? I mean, what is it? Why is it so? Why is it so persistent? In the culture, whether it be Hispanic, African American, Asian, or Caucasian. Is it because humanity in itself is just a fallen, how do you say it? I don't know how to explain it, but is it because we've taken steps back instead of forward? We're no longer the people that we might have been. We've lost that hope and that faith, and possibly my belief is the one that's created us and put us here on this earth. Is it because we don't stand as men used to stand, and as women used to stand with a sense of self-respect? What is the reason for all these situations?
Right. So I don't know which one of you wants to take that on, but just a historical footnote here, because part of your question is, are human beings intrinsically violent and predisposed to war? There's a famous study of soldiers in World War II, which is what led to the reform of basic training in the U.S. military, because what they found in World War II is most soldiers didn't want to kill. They would have to be trained and convinced in many ways, because for most Americans, killing runs against your family traditions, right? So I know Justice has thought a lot about this, but go ahead, Justice.
I think that question is something you got to ask yourself. I think this is something that it's incumbent on us to ask ourselves this. As I mentioned about the nature and the acceptance by which we're seeing these shootings, and we see this violence happening right in front of us. And I would challenge someone to really think about the numbers in aggregate of people who are dying right now in America. I mean, and the nature that we look at violence, versus war. But to answer your question, I would just say, I shared an office with some folks when I was at MIT. A couple of them right next to us were astrophysicists. Now, I cannot speak to the mechanics of what they do. The biggest nugget of wisdom that I took from them is that the Earth is inherently decadent. It's not supposed to make it. We're not going to make it. That's not real. I mean, what happens with these things, if you look at the planets, there are all these balls of gases of different elements. We just happen to be a carbon-based one. And that what happens is that the Earth is sucked in a very violent implosion. I mean, I'm nutshelling this because I can't even explain it. And it gets pulled in there, and then out of this, and all these planets come into this hot thing, and then out of that we get life, in a nutshell. So this idea that we're not, human beings, there's nothing we can do to destroy the planet. That's the truth. Now, we can destroy ourselves on the planet, and that's something that's very real, and we're witnessing that. Matter of fact, you are all playing starring roles in that occurrence. But the question is like, okay, so we're not going to make it. Now, that's not nihilism. It's not saying like, well, what's the point? It's just saying that this isn't going to happen now, however long it's going to take. The question I would ask is, do we have to live in torture? Do we have to live in pain? And what does that mean? I've heard a lot of different stories, and I've spent a lot of time trying to think about this, and this is one of those existential questions that we ask ourselves about the human nature. And I don't know that we're all that complex. I think we're much more complex than we know what to do with. But when we look at things, and I just turned to quesadillas and grilled cheese sandwiches, man. Two different people, same ingredients, same thing. No, but I would just say to think about that. I don't know. And I don't know that anyone does. I know for a fact that I don't know that we need the pain and these other things, but I don't know that the game is always on Sunday. And I think as long as people are kind of like, we'll change enough, but we still got to make it to the game on Sunday. So as long as we don't have to compromise that, we'll listen to whatever you got to say. But as soon as it's changing these other things, I don't know that we have it within us. But I don't know,
Anybody else in here?
That was one hell of a loaded question. lot of components are in there, and I'm going to quote a line from Karate Kid. Mr. Miyagi told Daniel-san that a lie becomes the truth only if you want to believe it. Now, deep down inside, I was listening to you. That was your explosive question. Only you can answer that for yourself. When you asked that question, other people around here probably came within themselves to answer that for themselves. Yeah, it's rough. It's a big question. It's a dynamite question. It's a very expansive type question. And it's an individual thing. That's all I can say.
There's a hand over here. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I wanted to comment one thing, that I'm Palestinian Arab by origin, so I've been in the civil war, we've had our country taken, I've seen some craziness back in the Middle East. And I came to America because I decided, there must be more to life. And one of the things that helped me understand is the word ignorance as a planet. I think we're all stuck in ignorance, really. And Buddhism helps me understand. So, I'm born Christian, but, and I like both Jesus and Buddha. But ignorance is, they have a circle of life and how we keep repeating. And on top of this circle, like there's a monster holding it in place. And that monster is fear. And that's what keeps us rooted with greed and fear and all that, we're going around in circles. That's what the game is all about. And unless we wake up one by one and start the shift, then maybe the shift will happen. Because we're still stuck. We're still doing the same old thing. Communication like today is very helpful. I'm trying to listen and understand. I've listened, but I couldn't get all of it. But I think the more we are able to share and express and embrace our ignorance so that we can learn and be open to each other, rather than spout what we think, say what our opinion is, and all that stupid and superficial things to make us feel secure. We need to learn and listen to each other and have more of these forums, so that in a friendly way, so that we can ask our questions and start. My question would be like, what would you suggest in society to do so that things can open up with all of us, so that when veterans come, we can talk to them. People don't even know how to talk to them because they're living a life of illusion, of TV and programs and reality shows and all that thing. So they wouldn't know how to connect and listen. So we need more to kind of start, and this is excellent to me.
Well, real quick, I think that I think about this. I would happen to be in Boston when the marathon bombing happened. And that shelter-in-place thing was probably the weirdest thing I've ever experienced, because I was living in a mostly Dominican neighborhood, so everyone's outside because it was just kind of Tuesday. Being a suspect on the streets that you live is just kind of how it happens anyway. But in any case, what was amazing, and a colleague of mine kind of wrote this, but it shut the city down. It stopped sports. This is the stuff that we respond to. Like, what is the act of love? What is the technology of love that would stop sports? Like, what could happen? What's the counter to that? I think when I say that I'm from a long line of badass brown people who will stop at nothing to bring music and art to children, that's not tongue-in-cheek. It's what I do. And it's where I found refuge. It's where I found solace in between all this. And I think the things, as far as we know, and there's a lot of folks who, Haraway, and a lot of folks would argue this point, but I would just say, human beings, we do this thing. We do this music and art thing. We create a collective aesthetic, a value to the aesthetic value to the collective at an optimality where we're not taking anything from it. It's a really unique way of using our time and our space. And something I say for working with children all over the country in places that adults seem to think are very violent. I think the adults are very violent. Anyway, is that when these things happen, is watching children happy inside of violence, inside of tremendous pain. I could go on and wax poetically about stories of deployment and people who can find, it's not in ignorance, it's not out of a hokey, mythical, you're not making it up like it's not happening, but to see the poetry and to see this and to react that way, to react poetic and to think of our lives as poetry. After UCSD, and I really had to think about what privilege really meant because I felt like it didn't make sense because I saw pain inside of it. A colleague from Stanford knows where this is coming from, but when I looked at people who we would look at as having privilege. But I say everyone has a poem and everybody has a price. And the trick and the treasure in our lives are to find the humility to be honest about both. And that takes a bit of intentional courage. But when we find that, I think when we start thinking about music and art and what the value of this is in terms of humanity and where we've gone so far away from that in terms of valuing everything but. And I think that's where we start this, right?
Hey, a question right here.
So in the interest of promoting communication and not to create a default solution, I wanted to kind of come back to the question of that we started this conversation with of saying thank you for your service. I wanted to ask for each of you what was an encounter or an opening of an encounter that you had with another person that did not shut you up, but instead opened you up to feeling that you could communicate about your experience.
From 1969 to about October 2000, nobody ever came up to me and said, thank you for your service. In 2000, I was in Washington, D.C., and my sister said, my middle name is Donald, she said, as I was leaving, what did you do in the war? I stopped and I froze. I said, I killed people for the United States government. Then I backtracked and I said, why are you asking me this now? She said, because people came by the house in uniform and said, do not ask me anything about what I did. When, by the time I went out the front door to the car, I think I lost maybe about 10 pounds from water for crying. It was like a release. Everybody was afraid to ask me. And the first time I heard that phrase, thank you for your service, I didn't say nothing to him. I had on a Marine Corps cap. I wasn't in Desert Storm or nothing like that. They were too young to know that I was in Vietnam. It just threw me for a loop. Now, since I'm in these veteran organizations, nursing organizations, et cetera, playing music with 3rd Marine Air Wing Band and stuff like this, when people said, thank you for your service, I said, no, thank you. But it's still hard to respond to that because of that time frame. All the way up until now. We're talking about 40 years later, and then they want to thank me. That's kind of redundant. Even if when I came back, like it was stated, they had us marked down as baby killers, women killers, children. And it was on the news like that. And I was very angry because there were women and children killing us. So what we supposed to do, see a little kid and a woman with AK-47 just standing up, let them kill us? No. We had to do something. That war was really horrific, believe me. But once again, I have a better attitude, maybe in the back of my mind when someone says, thank you for your service, I'm thinking, they don't know no better, but I'll go back. you know, thank you. That's all I can do. That's it.
Monica?
I can't think of a specific encounter because not a lot of people ask me about my service, so I can't really think of an encounter. But I think it is like I mean, even my brother. He was in Kuwait, you know, during the war, and I feel sometimes it's hard for me to ask him, you know. So I can understand why you don't know how to ask people questions about like their service, but I think that it is important to ask. I guess because if anybody asks me, like I wouldn't mind. I mean, I'm very open, so ask me any question and I would answer. I guess there are some aspects that might be difficult to talk about or to answer. But I feel like if somebody asked me, then I would talk about it, and I think it feels good to talk about it, and I think it's important to like in class, like the other day, like I think a week ago, just a gentleman in my class was in the Army, and he was talking about his service. So then I felt like I could talk about mine, and it just felt good. And then like our professor, we were talking about like ethnicity. I'm not ethnicity. Ethics and public organizations. And so he started asking us questions that I haven't, or situations in the workplace where you see something unethical and whether or not to report it. So it was something that I never ever talked about, and then it was nice that he asked because I felt. So I started emailing him and sort of telling him about what happened when I was in the service. But I felt like I couldn't share it like vocally, but it was nice that he asked, you know, and it felt good to talk about it. So I think even though maybe it might be weird, like I still think that it's important to ask. Because I mean, and then when people don't ask, I feel like, oh, well, people just don't care, so that's why they don't ask, you know, so.
Like with a lot of things, I'm going to tell a story about teaching and about working with youth and children. And the Marine Corps has this adage that says you never tailor your uniform to fit your body. You always tailor your body to fit the uniform. And with children, I don't lie to children. I feel like if there's something in my life that I'm doing, that if a child is asking me a question, I should be able to look that child in the eyes and be honest with the child. And I feel like if there's something I'm doing in my life that would lead me to be lying to a child, I should probably really reevaluate what that thing is. Now, you'll find if you practice that endeavor, it's very difficult to account for ourselves to children, because I think about them a lot as looking at us, and very rightfully so, they hold us accountable for everything that they are dealing with, and they should. And so where my thing came from, is talking to kids and them asking me questions. Adults, I always figure that they're snakes and they're on some other stuff. And I always question this person who I met right now, who's so interested in the most intimate part of my life and why they would be asking me these questions. It never really makes sense. I mean, what would you like to get some coffee from? Would you like to know me more than that? Because what is it that I'm going to say? But the irony in this is that when you're working with teachers and you get to see what they do, how odd it is to be thanked for your service by someone who's doing this every day. And it's kind of like, nah, I'm going to thank you for yours. And there's another thing, a friend, I mean, this is a military thing, but the story about awards, it's never what you did to get the award. It's not my military service and everything that happened until I got out. It's about every moment after, and about at any given moment from here until I'm dead. If I look at myself in any given moment and I say, am I doing things that, and this is about the award, but have you lived your life in a way that at any given moment you could prove yourself guilty of deserving that award? And is everything in your life, you know, showing you that you would deserve this? In the Marines, we got the thing is that at any given moment, if you were stopped and asked, could you prove yourself guilty of being a Marine? If you looked at yourself and the way you're conducting your life, the way you live with integrity or not, could you say that? And so I think a lot about that with service. So we'll see. I don't know, you know, jury's still out. Hopefully I got a couple more years, you know.
All right, one last question. Yeah.
Not necessarily on service, but when they find out, or they say, like, oh, you're a veteran, you're like, oh, they surprised that you were a veteran, or you were in the Marines.
Oh, yes. Yes, and that was funny. I think we were talking about that earlier. Sometimes, like, when I discover somebody's a veteran, I'll ask them a series of questions like, oh, what was your MOS? And, you know, where were you stationed? And I'll use terminology that really usually only military people use. And then they'll say, oh, so you know someone in the military. So they never assume that I'm a veteran or that I had prior service. They just, just assume I must know somebody. So that's normally the reaction I get, yeah.
Two things. If you would like to really understand a veteran, it's one solution. Sit down and talk to them. Just ask them. Veterans are dying for questions. Just ask. That's the one thing. The second thing is, I found a cartoon on Facebook. A little boy turned around to his teacher and told his teacher that my dad said there are only two branches of military, Army and Navy. The Air Force is a corporation, and the Marine Corps is a cult. And when you think about it, it's that Marine Corps culture, which is a cult. And I'm proud. But as soon as I get a chance, I'm going to blow that picture up and fill in the color and print them out. I love it. Thank you.
Jorge,
Yes, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a great idea that's a book by Alfredo called Gods Go Begging. And there's this idea in there about the speedometer and about how most folks, when you look at a speedometer, it goes 0 to 140. But you experience some things in your life and you realize that that speedometer goes much further than 140 and it goes way below 0. And I think a lot of us, I think that camaraderie and the idea that you're around folks who understand that that speedometer is not there, that's not real. And there's something very refreshing about knowing that, And I'll say, just in closing to this whole thing, I appreciate everyone coming out. I think the question that the gentleman asked about us and about the things that we think of as normal and that we're willing to accept as being normal, that's something that, having had this conversation and having sat here with you all, the question is tonight when we all go home. I mean, this idea of war coming home, the war is not over. And we have people right now still deployed. And in terms of the lives of the Afghani people and the Iraqi people, it will be a long time. And the Vietnamese people, still to this day. And all the other people and all the other wars that have never been announced and are not on TV, is that it's very real. And this is how we do business. And this is who we are. And this is our culture. And to accept that we all, whether we agree or we say we agree or not, we do in our terms of consumption and the way we live our lives. So I don't know that that's human nature. I think it's something that we can think about when we go home tonight. We hug the people we love. And we realize that there's a lot of other folks who are never going to get to hug them, right?
On that note, I want to thank everyone for coming out, and please applaud these folks for whatever reason you want to, but I think they've proven themselves again tonight. Thank you.
This program was one of 5 public conversations exploring different facets of the veteran experience conducted during the summer of 2014 as part of War Comes Home, a Cal Humanities statewide initiative to open minds to the critical issues veterans face when coming home from war. How should communities welcome service members back? How can we build bridges of understanding between those who have served and those who have not? For more information, visit www.calhum.org. Public Conversations is a project of Cal Humanities in partnership with the University of California Humanities Research Institute, the California State Library, and California Public Libraries. It is supported in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Bay Tree Fund, the Whitman Institute, and the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services under the provisions of the Library Services and Technology Act, administered in California by the State Librarian. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording do not necessarily represent those of Cal Humanities, the University of California Humanities Research Institute, the California State Library, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Bay Tree Fund, or the Whitman Institute.